The air on the distant planet of Calith 9 was thick with dust, the remnants of a long-forgotten war that had ravaged the once thriving city. Dr. Eleanor Swift crouched beside a massive stone structure, her fingers tracing the surface of a weathered stone tablet half buried in the sand. The tablet was unlike anything she had ever seen. Ancient symbols, worn by time and the elements, twisted into shapes that seemed to defy the logic of any known language. Her heart raced with anticipation. This was it, the discovery that could redefine humanity's understanding of its own history. As she carefully brushed away the layers of dirt, a faint glow pulsed from the stone, momentarily blinding her. She staggered back, eyes wide with shock. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind nothing but the faintest hum in the air. Something was alive within this tablet. "Dr. Swift, we found something," came the voice of Lieutenant Mara Calderon, one of the security officers assigned to protect the excavation site. She approached cautiously, her hand resting on the grip of her plasma rifle. Dr. Swift didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the tablet. There was an undeniable energy emanating from it, as if it were a beacon calling her to something greater. She had spent years researching the long-lost promises made by humanity's ancestors, those fabled oaths and treaties that had been whispered about for centuries. She had always assumed they were just myths, stories to inspire the next generation. But this was something different. "Something's hidden in here," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I'm sure of it." Before Mara could respond, the sound of engines roaring through the air shattered the moment. Dr. Swift's eyes snapped up to the sky, where a fleet of sleek ships descended rapidly, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows across the ruined cityscape. They were too fast, too organized, to be a random group of travelers. "Mercenaries," Mara muttered under her breath, eyes narrowing. The ships landed with military precision, a dozen armed figures emerging from their transports. Their leader, a tall man with cold, calculating eyes and a jagged scar running across his face, stepped forward. Jax Calloway, a name that Dr. Swift knew all too well. He was infamous in the galactic underworld, a ruthless man who would stop at nothing to acquire anything of value. "You have something that belongs to me, Dr. Swift," Calloway said, his voice low and menacing as he approached. His men fanned out behind him, weapons drawn. "Hand over the tablet. Now." Dr. Swift stood tall, her back straight. She had no intention of giving in. "I don't know what you think you found, but this is not for you. It's humanity's legacy." Calloway smirked. "Humanity's legacy? Or perhaps it's a treasure from a time you can barely comprehend. You see, I have my own interests in these legacies." He glanced over at his crew, who seemed to grow more restless by the second. "I suggest you don't make this harder than it needs to be." Dr. Swift's hand hovered over the tablet, but her thoughts raced. She had just uncovered the first piece of something much larger, something that could change everything. The Testament, an ancient document from the old Earth, buried deep in the annals of history. It was rumored to contain a promise made by humanity long before the collapse of the old governments. A promise that humanity would protect not just their own kind, but all life in the galaxy from an unimaginable threat. The implications were staggering, and she wouldn't let Calloway take it. "Leave now, or you won't leave at all," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Calloway's lips curled into a smirk as he raised his hand, signaling his men to advance. "You'll regret this." Mara's hand tightened around her rifle. In a flash, shots rang out, the crackle of energy weapons filling the air. Dr. Swift dove for cover behind the nearest pillar, heart pounding. Her mind raced. She had to protect the tablet. It was humanity's last hope, and if Calloway got his hands on it, the galaxy would be doomed. The sound of blaster fire echoed through the ruins of Calith 9 as Dr. Eleanor Swift scrambled for cover behind the crumbling pillars of the ancient city. Her heart pounded in her chest, and every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but she wouldn't leave the tablet behind. It was the key to humanity's forgotten promise, a promise that could save them all. Mara fired back, her plasma rifle glowing with each shot, the force of the blasts sending dust and debris flying. The mercenaries had closed in quickly, and there were too many of them. 12 against 2, no amount of firepower would turn the odds in their favor. "Get to the shuttle," Mara shouted, ducking behind a pillar as another barrage of fire splintered the stone around them. Dr. Swift's mind raced. The shuttle was their only escape route, but they'd never make it with this many enemies closing in. Her gaze flicked to the tablet still clutched in her hand. It was all they had left. She couldn't let it fall into Calloway's hands. A shadow moved in the corner of her eye. She barely had time to react before a mercenary's figure lunged toward her. Reflexes kicking in, Dr. Swift swung her leg out, tripping him to the ground before scrambling backward. She fired a quick shot from her sidearm, hitting another mercenary square in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, but there were still too many. "Dr. Swift," Mara shouted, pulling her to her feet. "We need to go, now." Suddenly, the sound of engines roared to life above them. 2 massive ships descended from the clouds, their sleek hulls unmistakable. They weren't mercenaries, they were military. 12 men and women in heavy tactical armor jumped from the ships, landing with cat-like precision on the cracked stone. They were part of a faction Dr. Swift had only heard rumors about, the Guardians. They were a mysterious group, supposedly long extinct, dedicated to the protection of the galaxy's most sacred secrets. Captain Aiden Rhodes, a tall, imposing man with graying hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. His uniform was pristine, marked with insignia Dr. Swift didn't recognize, but the intensity in his gaze made it clear he was not a man to be trifled with. "Step away from the tablet, Dr. Swift," he ordered, his voice calm yet commanding. "It's not safe here." "What are you doing here?" Dr. Swift asked, her confusion evident. "Who are you?" "The Guardians," Captain Rhodes replied simply, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We've been watching you, Dr. Swift. You've uncovered something far bigger than you realize." "Bigger?" Dr. Swift was skeptical. "I don't have time for cryptic speeches. Calloway is here, and he'll stop at nothing to get that tablet." "Then we'll stop him." Rhodes's eyes hardened. "But we need the tablet to fulfill an ancient promise. It's not just a relic of the past, it's a warning." Dr. Swift's stomach twisted with unease. She had always suspected there was more to the testament than anyone realized. But a warning? A warning for what? Before she could ask more, Calloway's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "You can't protect her forever, Rhodes." The mercenary leader emerged from the rubble, his weapon raised. "That tablet belongs to me." Mara fired once more, narrowly missing him, but Calloway didn't flinch. He had backup, and he knew it. Captain Rhodes turned his gaze toward Dr. Swift. "We have no time to explain everything, but I promise you, we are your best chance at survival. That tablet is part of a prophecy, an oath humanity made long ago. If we don't stop Calloway now, we may never have another chance to honor that promise." Dr. Swift swallowed hard. The weight of the situation was crashing down on her. The artifact she had uncovered was no longer just a mystery. It was the key to humanity's survival. It wasn't a matter of discovery anymore. It was a matter of preventing a catastrophe. She nodded grimly. "All right, what do we do next?" Rhodes stepped forward, signaling his team to advance. "We fight. Together." Without waiting for a response, he led the charge, his team fanning out behind him. Blaster fire erupted once more, but this time, the Guardians were in control. They moved with precision, their coordinated strikes overwhelming Calloway's mercenaries. Dr. Swift felt a surge of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. As the battle raged around her, she realized that the struggle for the tablet was only just beginning. The real fight, one that would determine the future of the galaxy, was only a few steps away, and they would need all the help they could get to stop the storm that was coming. The battle raged on around Dr. Eleanor Swift as the mercenaries were quickly overpowered by the Guardians' precise and disciplined strikes. Blaster fire echoed through the ruined city, ricocheting off broken pillars and the remnants of ancient structures. Despite the chaos, the Guardians maintained perfect coordination, systematically pushing Calloway's men back toward the edge of the excavation site. Captain Aidan Rhodes fought with a quiet intensity, his team moving like a well-oiled machine. With each mercenary that fell, the odds shifted further in their favor. But Dr. Swift knew they weren't out of danger yet. Calloway wouldn't give up this easily. His obsession with the tablet was far too deep. "Mara, get to the shuttle," Dr. Swift shouted over the din, her voice barely audible against the sounds of battle. She glanced at her colleague, who was taking cover behind a ruined wall, methodically picking off mercenaries with expert precision. Mara nodded and gestured for Dr. Swift to follow. "I'll cover you," she said, and the two women made their move toward the waiting shuttle. As they sprinted across the dusty ground, the roar of engines grew louder. Another ship, a sleek, dark vessel, had entered the atmosphere, descending rapidly. Dr. Swift's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Calloway's ship, it was something else, something larger and far more intimidating. A sense of foreboding gripped her chest. The shuttle was only a few meters away when the new ship touched down with a violent thud, sending dust and debris into the air. The ramp lowered, revealing a squad of soldiers in black combat armor, each of them carrying high-powered weapons. Their leader, a woman with dark, braided hair and a scar running across her cheek, stepped forward. She surveyed the battlefield with cold, calculating eyes, locking onto Dr. Swift and Mara as if they were the only two people in the world. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Dr. Swift," the woman called out, her voice icy and commanding. Dr. Swift froze. "Who are you?" "I'm Commander Juno Kale," the woman replied, her tone flat. "And I'm here to take the tablet. It's our responsibility." Before Dr. Swift could respond, a voice rang out from the battlefield, filled with rage and malice. "No one takes the tablet." Calloway's voice was a snarl as he emerged from the rubble, his eyes blazing with fury. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Dr. Swift. "Mara, move," Dr. Swift shouted, pushing her colleague toward the shuttle. But it was too late. Calloway fired, and the shot hit its mark, knocking Dr. Swift to the ground with a sharp cry of pain. The world around her blurred as she hit the dust, her vision fading in and out. The tablet slipped from her grasp, its strange symbols glowing faintly as it slid across the cracked stone. "Mara," she gasped, trying to reach for the artifact, but her body refused to obey. Blood seeped from her side, and the pain was unbearable. Mara, her face a mask of fury and fear, turned back to face Dr. Swift. She tried to sprint back, but before she could reach her, Commander Kale's soldiers raised their weapons, blocking her path. "Step away from her," Kale ordered, her eyes narrowing. "This is over." "Mara, don't," Dr. Swift gasped, her voice weak but insistent. "We can't let them take it." Mara hesitated, her hand on her rifle, but there was a moment of indecision. The soldiers were too many, their weapons too advanced. She knew the fight was lost. The odds were against them now, but not for long. She could see the glimmer of hope in Dr. Swift's eyes, the same determination that had led them here in the first place. "You'll never understand what you've unleashed," Dr. Swift managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Commander Kale looked down at Dr. Swift with a steely gaze. "I understand more than you think, Dr. Swift, and I'm afraid the time for promises is over." Calloway grinned as he stalked forward, kneeling beside Dr. Swift, his fingers brushing over the tablet. "You think you've uncovered something important? It's just another relic to me, another piece of the past that I'll use to get what I want." Dr. Swift's mind was clouded with pain, but she forced herself to think. The Guardians, Commander Kale's mysterious group. None of them seemed to have any idea of what the Testament truly was. They were all chasing a phantom, unaware that the artifact had its own secrets, secrets that could doom them all if they weren't careful. "Mara, don't let them have it," Dr. Swift whispered, her voice barely audible. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and with a final, desperate glance, Mara made her decision. She turned and sprinted toward the shuttle, her eyes flashing with resolve. The battle was not over, not yet. Dr. Swift's vision began to fade as she felt herself drifting into unconsciousness, her last thought a desperate plea for humanity to understand what was coming. The Forgotten Testament was not just a relic of the past, it was a key that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. And the clock was ticking. The world around Dr. Eleanor Swift was a blur of pain and confusion. She could hear voices, distant but urgent, as if from behind a thick fog. The last thing she remembered was Calloway's triumphant sneer and the cold sting of his blaster shot tearing through her side. Then, nothing but darkness. When she regained consciousness, the first thing she felt was the sharp ache in her body. Her head throbbed with each pulse of blood, and the burn in her side reminded her that she wasn't out of danger yet. "Dr. Swift, you're awake." It was a soft, familiar voice, Mara's. Dr. Swift turned her head slightly, trying to focus on the woman's face hovering over her, concern written clearly across her features. She was sitting beside Dr. Swift, her hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You've been unconscious for several hours," Mara continued. "We managed to get you to the shuttle in time, but we had to leave the site behind. Calloway's men were still searching for you." Dr. Swift nodded weakly, but the memories of the battle rushed back in a flood. The tablet, Calloway, the mysterious soldiers, the woman, Commander Kale. Her hand shot out instinctively, but Mara caught it, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "It's all right, Eleanor. We're safe for now. We're in the secure zone." But the tablet, Dr. Swift's voice was barely above a whisper, a sharp pang of worry lancing through her chest. What happened to it? Mara hesitated for a moment, before looking away, her expression hardening. "It's in safe hands, but we had to get out of there quickly. The Guardians, well, Rhodes's group, are keeping it under tight guard. They believe it's part of a much larger picture, something tied to the galaxy's history, something we still don't understand." Dr. Swift's brow furrowed in confusion. And Commander Kale? Not much is known about her, but she and her faction are determined to find the artifact. They've been tracking it for months. Mara stood, walking toward a terminal in the corner of the shuttle's cabin. But they're not the only ones after it. Calloway wants it for his own reasons, and now the Guardians think we've unleashed something much bigger than we realized. Something bigger? Dr. Swift's voice was laced with skepticism. What could be bigger than a relic from humanity's past? Mara turned back, her face grim. "It's not just a relic. The tablet is the key to something called the Testament. It's an ancient document said to contain a promise, a vow made by humanity's first explorers when they discovered the galaxy. They promised to protect every sentient species, to be a shield against any threats that could destroy life itself." Dr. Swift blinked in disbelief. "A promise? Yeah, but the problem is, no one really knows what that promise means. The Testament isn't just words on a page, it's a warning. And the people chasing it, including Calloway, have no idea what they're dealing with." Dr. Swift processed the information, her mind working rapidly. "You're saying the Testament was a promise of protection. And now, what humanity has to fulfill it. It's not just about humanity. The Testament involves the entire galaxy. It's bigger than Earth, bigger than anything we've ever imagined. The Guardians believe it's tied to a disaster, one that could destroy everything. The artifact you uncovered is only the beginning. But we're not sure what exactly is coming or how to stop it." Dr. Swift stared at Mara in stunned silence. Her fingers brushed the bandage around her side, and she tried to sit up. Her body protested, but she pushed through the pain. "We need to understand the testament," Dr. Swift said, her voice steadying. "We need to find out what this promise is before Calloway or anyone else does. This is bigger than just us." Mara nodded, her expression hardening with determination. "Agreed, but there's a catch. The Guardians believe they're the only ones who should have access to it, and they're not just going to hand it over to us without a fight." "What do they want with it?" Dr. Swift asked, her mind racing. "If it's so important, why haven't they told us what it means?" "They say they're the protectors of humanity's promise," Mara said, her tone filled with frustration. "But that's all they'll tell us. They've kept this secret for centuries. Rhodes claims the time has come to fulfill it, but he won't let anyone else in. We're caught between Calloway, who wants to exploit the testament for his own gain, and the Guardians, who seem to think they're the only ones worthy of understanding it." Dr. Swift clenched her fists, a spark of defiance igniting within her. "We can't just let them control it. Humanity's promise, whatever it is, belongs to everyone. We can't keep it hidden in the hands of a few." "We'll have to be careful," Mara warned. "There are too many factions after it. If we're going to figure this out, we need to trust the right people." Dr. Swift's gaze hardened, her mind already working through the steps ahead. "We'll do it together. Whatever it takes, we have to honor the promise and stop whatever's coming." Outside the shuttle, the stars stretched across the vast expanse of space. But somewhere in the far reaches of the galaxy, a storm was brewing. A storm that could destroy everything, and humanity's forgotten testament was the only key to stopping it. The shuttle cut through the void of space, its engines humming steadily as it made its way to the secure outpost hidden deep within a nebula. Dr. Swift leaned back against the seat, the gentle rocking of the ship doing little to ease the tension that gripped her. The wound on her side had been patched up, but the weight of what she had learned from Mara was far heavier than any physical injury. A promise, buried in the annals of history, long forgotten but never truly gone. The testament wasn't just a relic, it was a galactic responsibility, an obligation to all life. And now, somehow, humanity had to fulfill it. "We'll reach the outpost in 3 hours," Mara said, her voice low as she sat across from Dr. Swift, poring over the encrypted data files they'd stolen from the Guardians. "But we need to figure out what our next move is once we're there. Rhodes won't let us walk in without a plan." Dr. Swift nodded, her mind still grappling with the sheer enormity of what they were facing. If the Guardians have been protecting the testament for centuries, they must have something to guide them, some way to decipher its meaning. If they truly believe humanity is the key to the galaxy's survival, they must know more than they're letting on. Mara scrolled through the data, her expression unreadable. "There are records here, some dating back to the earliest days of space exploration, but nothing concrete. Rhodes is hiding something. This isn't just about keeping the testament secret, it's about control." Dr. Swift's fingers drummed on the armrest. Control of what? Mara paused, glancing up with a look that was both calculating and cautious. "Of the galaxy's fate. The Guardians believe that the testament is a guide to prevent a cataclysmic event. Something tied to the ancient species who created it, a race far older than humanity, long extinct. They call them the Ancients, and they say the promise is meant to protect the galaxy from whatever wiped them out." Dr. Swift's breath caught in her throat. "A race that disappeared, and you think this promise is about preventing their fate from happening to us?" "That's what Rhodes believes," Mara replied. "But what they won't tell us is the full scope of the threat. And that's the part we need to figure out before Calloway, or worse, Commander Kell, does." Dr. Swift shifted uncomfortably. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were missing something crucial, a piece of the puzzle that hadn't fallen into place yet. "We need to go back to the site. There's something about that tablet, the symbols on it. They're not just writing. I think it's a map, A map to something. Mura's eyes narrowed. You want to go back to where Calloway and Kale's people are still hunting for it? Yes, Dr. Swift said without hesitation. There's a reason they want it so badly. I think it's more than just the testament. I think it's a key, and it's tied to the location of something that's been hidden for a very long time. Mara sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's a risk. Calloway's men are still out there, and the Guardians won't just let us walk in and take it. If we're going back, we need more than just the two of us. I know, Dr. Swift replied. We need to find someone who knows more about the ancients. Someone who can interpret these symbols and tell us what they mean. The Guardians have all the pieces of the puzzle, but they've been hiding it for too long. It's time to uncover the truth. The shuttle sensors chimed, indicating they were approaching their destination. The nebula ahead was dense with clouds of gas and swirling particles, masking the outpost from any prying eyes. As they drew closer, Dr. Swift could see the faint outline of the research facility emerging from the mist, its towering structure surrounded by nothing but the silence of space. Mara stood, securing her rifle to her back and checking her gear one last time. We'll need to be careful. We're not just dealing with rogue mercenaries anymore. Kale's soldiers are highly trained, and the Guardians, they're loyal to Rhodes, no matter what. They'll see us as a threat. I don't care, Dr. Swift said firmly, pushing herself to her feet despite the ache in her side. We're not backing down. The galaxy's future depends on this. The shuttle slid into the station's docking bay, the soft hiss of its engines signaling their arrival. The metallic doors opened to reveal a sterile white corridor stretching out ahead. At the far end, Dr. Swift could just make out the shape of a tall figure, silhouetted by the harsh light of the station's interior. Rhodes. He stood with his arms crossed, his eyes locked onto the approaching shuttle. There was no warmth in his expression, only the cold determination of a man who believed he held the key to everything. You're late, Rhodes said, his voice laced with an edge of irritation. I hope you've come with something useful, because we don't have time for games. Dr. Swift met his gaze without flinching. We're not here for games, Captain. We're here to stop the greatest threat the galaxy has ever faced, and we're not leaving without the answers we need. Rhodes' eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. He simply stepped aside, allowing them to pass. The weight of their mission hung heavily between them. The Guardian captain was no ally, but in that moment, he was the only person who might hold the final piece of the puzzle. As Dr. Swift and Mara stepped into the research facility, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Time was running out, and they all knew it. What they did next would decide the fate of the galaxy, and perhaps all of existence itself. The facility was a labyrinth of stark, white walls, humming machinery, and dimly lit corridors. The sterile atmosphere seemed almost suffocating, as if the very air was calculated to keep emotions in check and thoughts orderly. It felt more like a high-security prison than a research station, but Dr. Swift had long learned to trust her instincts, and they were telling her that Rhodes had secrets buried deeper than even the most heavily fortified vaults. Rhodes led them down a series of tight hallways, his steps deliberate and measured. He wasn't going to offer any answers, not yet. He had his own agenda, and for now, they were merely players in his game. This way, he said abruptly, turning into a door that slid open with a soft hiss. The room beyond was unlike any Dr. Swift had expected. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, marks she recognized from the tablet. Etchings of star maps, cryptic writings, and geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. This is the vault, Rhodes explained, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, cavernous space, where we keep the most sensitive of the Guardian's records. The testament isn't just a document. It's a living piece of history. Each page, each symbol, is a part of the galaxy's true past. And if it's not handled properly, it could bring about its destruction. Dr. Swift's heart quickened. The vault was far more than a mere storage facility. It was a place of untold knowledge, of promises written in blood and time, waiting to be unlocked. She could feel it, a weight pressing against her, urging her to understand what lay within these walls. "What exactly are we looking for?" Mara asked, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're here, Rhodes. We need answers. You said you had them." Rhodes turned, his eyes locking onto Mara with a look that could freeze the blood in one's veins. "I have answers, yes, but not the ones you think you're looking for. The testament isn't just a promise to protect. It's a warning, a prediction of sorts, an ancient prophecy." He reached out, brushing his hand over one of the stone pillars that supported the vault's ceiling. The symbols shimmered faintly, as though reacting to his touch. The ancients were an incredibly advanced race, far beyond anything we could imagine. Their downfall wasn't a simple tragedy, it was a deliberate end. A great war swept through their domain, and their extinction was the result of a galaxy-shattering event. The testament is both a record of that war and a warning to anyone who would repeat their mistakes. Dr. Swift took a step forward, her curiosity piqued. "A war that destroyed them? You think it's coming again? A repeat of their fate?" Rhodes turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Yes and no. You see, the testament foretells the return of the void, the very force that wiped out the ancients. It's not a natural disaster, Dr. Swift. It's an engineered weapon, a scourge created by an entity far older and far more dangerous than the ancients ever understood." A chill ran down Dr. Swift's spine. The void. The concept was too terrifying to grasp fully, but she had heard of it before. Whispers, stories of an ancient force capable of erasing entire civilizations from existence. If what Rhodes said was true, they were facing something that could destroy the galaxy once again. "But why aren't you telling us everything?" Mara's voice cracked, her frustration rising. "You've been hiding this from us. You say the testament is a warning, but you don't want anyone else to know the full truth." Rhodes remained silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as he considered the question. Then, slowly, he spoke, his voice more somber than before. "Because the more we know, the more dangerous it becomes. There are factions out there, like Calloway, who would use the testament to harness its power for their own gain. They don't care about the warning. They care only about control. And then there's Cal's group. The Guardians may have been tasked with protecting the promise, but there are those within our ranks who believe the void can be used as a weapon, a means to ensure our dominance over the galaxy." Dr. Swift's mind raced. The implications of Rhodes' words were staggering. If the void truly existed, if it were real, then humanity wasn't just facing a war. They were facing an extinction event. Worse still, they were caught in a web of intrigue and power struggles, with factions willing to manipulate the truth to suit their own needs. Rhodes stepped forward, moving to a large console at the far end of the vault. His fingers danced over the glowing controls, and a holographic map of the galaxy sprang to life, showing regions of space filled with unexplored anomalies and the faint outlines of long-lost civilizations. "The void isn't a single event," he continued, his voice tense. "It's a recurring one, a cycle, and it's been dormant for centuries. But it's waking up, and when it does, no one will be safe. Not the Guardians, not Calloway, not humanity. If the testament is correct, only one thing can stop it." Dr. Swift took a step forward, her breath catching. "What is it? What can stop this?" Rhodes' expression darkened. "The first of the ancients left a final command in the testament. They knew the void would return, and they built something to stop it. But it's hidden. The map you found, it's only the beginning. The real key is a device, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen, but we're not the only ones searching for it." The room seemed to close in around them, the weight of their mission suddenly overwhelming. They weren't just dealing with rogue mercenaries or secretive organizations anymore. They were hunting a weapon that could save, or destroy, the galaxy. "We need to find it first," Dr. Swift said, her voice resolute. Before it's too late. Rhodes looked at her, his gaze calculating. Then we have no time to waste. We're in this together now, whether we like it or not. The room was thick with tension as Rhodes turned away from the holographic map, his hands steady on the console. Dr. Swift's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of information he'd just laid bare. A weapon, ancient and powerful, capable of stopping the void, but hidden, lost to time, and only known to a select few. We need more details, Mara said, her voice cutting through the silence. You're talking about a weapon, but you're not saying where it is. What exactly is this device? Rhodes glanced at her but didn't immediately answer. He studied the holographic map, his eyes narrowing at the flashing points that marked anomalies in space, places where the void was said to have been last detected. Each anomaly glowed faintly, like the remnants of a dying star. His fingers flicked across the console, and a new set of data appeared, coordinates that led to places far beyond known space. The device, the weapon, is something the ancients constructed as a failsafe, Rhodes said, finally turning back to face them. It's not just a weapon in the conventional sense. It's a key, both a barrier and a force. It doesn't just destroy the void, it locks it away, prevents it from ever returning. But there's a price for using it. The ancients built it with the understanding that if it were activated, the cost would be unimaginable. Dr. Swift's heart sank. What cost? Rhodes hesitated, his gaze flicking momentarily to the map. The cost of balance. The void doesn't just represent destruction. It's a force that keeps the galaxy in equilibrium. Removing it means upsetting that balance. It could lead to chaos, civil war, or even the collapse of entire systems. The ancients understood this, but they believed that the threat of the void was far worse than the chaos its removal might bring. Mara's brow furrowed. So we're supposed to use this weapon to stop the void, but we're also risking the entire galaxy. Rhodes nodded slowly. Yes, that's the burden of the promise, and that's why it's been hidden. The Guardians didn't want humanity to take on that responsibility. They believed that we, our kind, weren't ready for the weight of such a choice. Dr. Swift stood silent, the weight of Rhodes' words sinking into her bones. Humanity wasn't just being asked to protect the galaxy, it was being asked to hold its fate in their hands, to wield power capable of saving it or tearing it apart. It was a choice she hadn't been prepared to make. How do we even find it? She asked quietly. You've shown us the coordinates, but the galaxy is vast. We can't just wander around hoping to stumble upon it. Rhodes' fingers moved across the console once more, and the map flickered, zooming in on one particular set of coordinates, a region of space marked by an enormous, nearly invisible anomaly. This is where it begins, he said. The first step of the map. It's an ancient relay station, used by the ancients as a communication hub. It's long gone, abandoned, but the coordinates are key. They'll lead us to the next phase of the weapon's location, but we'll need to get there before anyone else does. Mara crossed her arms. And what about Kale? We've seen his soldiers. They're not far behind. Rhodes' expression darkened. Kale won't stop. He believes that if humanity takes control of the device, we'll have the power to reshape the galaxy in our image. But his vision is twisted. He doesn't understand the consequences. He's been blinded by ambition. Dr. Swift felt a chill run through her. Kale's soldiers were methodical, ruthless, and far better equipped than anything she had seen in her time as a researcher. The stakes had been raised, and with each passing moment, their enemies grew more desperate. I won't let Kale have it, she said, her voice steely. We have to find it first, no matter the cost. Rhodes studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained grim. Agreed, but be prepared. The path ahead won't be easy. There are others, old factions, hidden organizations, that will do anything to prevent this weapon from being activated. And not all of them will be as obvious as Cal. Mara uncrossed her arms and stepped forward. What do you mean? Who else is out there? Rhodes hesitated again. The Guardians are not the only ones who have been protecting the Testament. There's a secret group, an organization that predates the Guardians. They're known as the Custodians. They've been watching over the remnants of the Ancients for millennia, and they've been waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. Dr. Swift's heart skipped a beat. You're telling me there's another faction, one that knows about the Testament and about the Void? Yes, Rhodes confirmed, his tone darker now, and they've been working in the shadows. They want the weapon too. They want to control it, not to stop the Void, but to harness it, to use it as a means to dominate the galaxy. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't just racing against Kale. They were up against a hidden enemy, one that had been watching for centuries, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then it's a race against time, Dr. Swift said, her voice hardening with resolve. We need to get to that relay station before the Custodians do. If they find it first, we may never get another chance. Rhodes looked at her with something like approval. Agreed, but prepare yourselves. The Custodians won't be easy to deal with. They're as old as the Guardians and just as deadly. Dr. Swift nodded, feeling the weight of the mission settle even deeper into her chest. The future of the galaxy and the survival of humanity depended on them finding the weapon first, and they would have to face enemies, both known and unknown, to ensure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. There's no turning back now, Dr. Swift said, her voice resolute. Let's go find this weapon and make sure we're the ones to stop the Void. With that, they turned toward the exit, ready to face whatever waited ahead. The final leg of their journey had begun, and the tension in the air was palpable. The coordinates Rhodes had given them led them deep into an uncharted region of space, a sector so distant and unmonitored that even the most advanced galactic scanners couldn't detect their presence until it was too late. Dr. Swift, Mara, and Rhodes had been traveling in silence for hours, the hum of the ship the only sound between them. Each of them was lost in their own thoughts, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. We're approaching the coordinates, Rhodes finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a note of uncertainty in it. Even he, the ever-confident leader, knew that what awaited them at the relay station could change everything. The holographic map in front of Dr. Swift flickered as the ship's autopilot aligned them with the correct trajectory. They were close now. The final destination was just beyond the next star system, tucked within the shadow of a massive dead planet, one that had been abandoned eons ago by the ancients themselves. Everything's been quiet, Mara remarked, her sharp eyes scanning the ship's instruments. Too quiet. Rhodes stiffened, his fingers tapping against the console in a rapid, nervous rhythm. They'll be here soon. The Custodians, Cal's forces, they won't let us get to the relay station without a fight. Dr. Swift looked out through the ship's viewport, seeing nothing but the dark, vast expanse of space ahead of them. We don't have the luxury of waiting for them to catch up, she said, her tone resolute. We need to move faster. The ship made a sharp turn, slicing through the silence of the Void, and in the distance, a faint shimmer of light began to emerge, distant, but unmistakably there. It was the station, a relic from the ancients' time, the last piece of their incredible civilization. As they drew closer, the station became clearer, a ringed structure, weathered by time, orbiting the planet in a slow, deliberate path. Its surface was scarred, pocked with the remnants of weapons fire from a war long past. This was it, the place where everything would either be won or lost. Prepare to dock, Rhodes ordered. His voice was no longer uncertain. This was a man who had come to accept the finality of their mission. The ship connected with the station's docking port with a soft thud. The airlock cycled open, and they stepped into the station, the eerie silence of the place enveloping them like a shroud. The walls were adorned with strange symbols, much like the ones in the vault, patterns that seemed to pulse with a faint glow, beckoning them forward. "Where do we start?" Mara asked, her voice a whisper in the darkness. Rhodes moved forward, his eyes scanning the walls, looking for something, anything, that might offer guidance. "We find the central control room," he said after a pause. "It's where the ancients activated the relay. From there, we should be able to access the next step in the weapon's location." As they moved deeper into the station, the stillness grew more oppressive. Each footstep echoed in the vast hallways, and Dr. Swift couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the haunting feeling of walking through the ruins of a lost civilization. It was as if the very station itself was aware of their presence, waiting to reveal its secrets. They reached the control room, a vast chamber at the center of the station. The walls were lined with intricate consoles, many of which flickered dimly with long-dead power. In the center of the room stood a massive terminal, the centerpiece of the relay, now barely functional after centuries of disuse. Rhodes approached the terminal and placed his hand on it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the terminal came to life. Holographic screens flickered to life, displaying streams of data too complex for Dr. Swift to fully comprehend. "It's activating," Rhodes muttered, his voice tinged with awe. "This is it." But before they could celebrate, an alarm blared, sharp and shrill. The station's lights flickered, casting long, ominous shadows across the room. The walls began to shake, and a loud voice echoed through the chamber, booming from the station's intercom system. "Intruders detected. Evacuation protocols initiated. Lockdown in effect." Dr. Swift's heart raced. "They found us." Mara's eyes narrowed. "The custodians?"